Welcome to Restoria, your cozy corner for gentle bedtime stories. My name is James and I'll be your host tonight. Every night, we bring you peaceful tales designed to calm your mind and help you drift off into a deep, restful sleep. So snuggle in, close your eyes, and let the story begin. The story tonight is called The Clockmaker's Dreamtime Clock. Chapter 1. Ticks and Teacups. In the heart of a quiet village nestled between drowsy hills and silver-laced meadows, there stood a little clock shop with ivy climbing its wooden walls and a bell above the door that chimed like a sigh. The sign hanging outside read Theo's Timepieces, though the villagers simply called it the Clock House. Inside, the air smelled of cedar shavings, old paper, and tea that had been steeped slowly and kindly. Clocks of all kinds lined the shelves and walls. Tall grandfather clocks with brass pendulums swinging like slow heartbeats. Dainty porcelain cuckoo clocks that chirped on the hour with cheerful tones, and pocket watches with faces so delicate they seemed to whisper time instead of declare it. At the center of it all was Theo. Theo was a small, gentle man with a beard like fog and hands worn smooth by years of patient crafting. He moved like time itself, never hurried, never stilled. Each morning, he brewed a pot of chamomile tea, lit a candle even when the sun was out, and listened to the language of his clocks. The villagers adored Theo, not just for the way his clocks always ran true, but for the quiet comfort his presence gave. When a child had trouble sleeping, Theo would send them home with a wind-up owl that ticked like a lullaby. When an old couple celebrated their anniversary, he'd present a small glass clock that chimed in the key of their favorite waltz. Yet for all his kindness, Theo lived alone. Not sadly, but simply. His clocks were his company, and they spoke often. He believed each one had its own personality. The tall ones were steady and thoughtful. The little ones were curious. One particular desk clock near his workbench had a hiccup in its tick, like it was always laughing at some private joke. But one rainy afternoon, something different happened. The sky outside was a soft, smudged gray. Raindrops tapped the window pane like careful fingers. Theo sat in his rocking chair beside the fire, sipping warm lemon tea and watching the steam curl upward. That's when the idea came. It wasn't loud. It didn't arrive like thunder. It floated into his thoughts like a featherlight, quiet and impossible to ignore. Build one more clock. He blinked, looked at his tools resting on the bench, then at the old piece of moon-colored wood tucked away on a high shelf. It had been there for years, untouched. He had always meant to use it for something special, but had never decided what. Until now, he stood, slow and careful, and brought the wood down. It was pale and smooth, with grain that shimmered faintly like starlight had soaked into it. He didn't sketch a design. He didn't write out instructions. He simply began. Theo carved, shaped, and assembled the clock with no plan other than the rhythm in his hands and the hush in his heart. It felt less like building and more like remembering something he had once known. The sun set unnoticed. The fire burned low. By the time he placed the last gear into its home and wound the key, the room had grown dim, and the clock began to tick. Not sharply, not even like his other clocks. It pulsed. A low, soft rhythm like the heartbeat of someone fast asleep. Theo leaned back in his chair, eyes fluttering closed. The rain whispered against the windows, the fire crackled faintly, and the new clock, silent to everyone else, began to glow. Not brightly, not even with light, but with a kind of presence, as though it was watching over the room, breathing in time with the fire. And as Theo drifted into sleep, he dreamed of a meadow filled with lanterns that floated like jellyfish through the air. A soft tune played in the distance, and he felt as if he were flying without wings, without worry. When he awoke, it was morning. The clock sat still and quiet, but something inside Theo had changed. His hands felt lighter. His heart hummed gently. He looked at the clock and smiled. It didn't tell the hour. It didn't chime. But somehow, it kept something even more precious. It kept the feeling of wonder. And Theo, for the first time in many years, couldn't wait for the next dream to begin. Chapter 2. The Glow Beneath the Gears. The next few days unfolded like a lullaby. Theo continued his quiet routines, brewing tea, winding clocks, dusting the shelves with a soft clod hand, yet something gentle had shifted. The shop felt warmer, even when it rained. Time, always his dearest companion, now felt like it walked beside him instead of behind. The new clock sat on a shelf above his workbench, cradled between an hourglass-shaped pendulum and a pocket watch that refused to tick when it rained. It didn't tick loudly, it barely moved. But when Theo looked at it, he sometimes felt as if he were standing at the edge of a dream. One evening, as twilight folded over the village and lamps blinked to life in windows like fireflies, Theo sat again beside the fire. The rain had passed, but the clouds lingered, brushing the rooftops like sleepy hands. The clock pulsed, faintly but steadily. Theo watched. Then it happened again. Not with sound, not with motion, but with feeling. A memory he hadn't touched in decades returned as suddenly and clearly as a chime in still air. He was 6, lying in tall summer grass behind his grandfather's house. The air had smelled of lavender and beeswax, and above him the clouds had moved like slow thoughts. He'd believed, just then, that the sky could dream, that maybe he was inside one. He blinked. The memory slipped away, but not entirely. It stayed, nestled under his ribs. He turned to the clock. Its face was blank. No numbers, just the faintest outline of a spiral that shimmered when the light shifted. Theo reached out and touched the side of its case. It was warm, not like fire, but like the last sunbeam resting on a windowsill. That night, his dreams deepened. He wandered through forests of glowing mushrooms, heard lullabies played on wind chimes made of glass, and saw a fox curled atop a pillow made of time itself. When he awoke, he wrote it all down in the little brown notebook he kept for clock sketches. But this wasn't a sketch. It was a story, and the clock, as if in agreement, pulsed once. The villagers noticed too. Not the clock itself, no one had seen it, but they noticed Theo's smile had softened, that his voice carried a gentle tune when he spoke, as if each word was chosen for its kindness. Children lingered by his window on their way to bed, whispering to each other about the music they sometimes heard, like tiny music boxes playing just out of sight. One morning, a little girl named Lila came in holding her father's old watch. "It stopped," she said, placing it gently on the counter. "But I don't mind the ticking. It helps me sleep." Theo took the watch in his hands. The gears were tired, but not broken. He smiled. "I think it just forgot what dreams sounded like." Lila tilted her head. "Can you help it remember?" Theo nodded. "I think I can." He brought the watch to the workbench. The new clock sat quietly above, watching or perhaps listening. Theo opened the watch's case and worked slowly, carefully. As he adjusted the gears, he began to hum a soft tune, the one from his dream. The moment he tightened the last screw, the watch gave a soft tick, then another. Slow, content. He handed it back. Lila held it to her ear and smiled. "It's whispering," she said. "That's how you know it's dreaming again," Theo replied. That night, Theo sat with a fresh pot of tea, the fire crackling low. The new clock pulsed steadily, its soft glow casting gentle shadows on the wall. Theo leaned back and whispered, "What shall we remember tonight?" And the clock, in its own quiet way, answered. A scene unfolded behind his eyes on ocean made of mirrors, where he floated without fear, where the stars hummed lullabies and the waves whispered secrets in a language he somehow understood. He slept with a smile, and the clock, pulsing like a heart in tune with the sky, kept dreaming beside him, not keeping time, but holding it. Chapter 3. The Clock That Caught a Wish. The clock's glow became a part of Theo's days, like sunlight through the curtains or the sound of a kettle just beginning to boil. It didn't tick so much as breathe an inhale of memory, an exhale of wonder. Theo had stopped trying to explain it, even to himself. It was enough to listen. One crisp morning, when the air smelled like fresh apples and chimney smoke, a boy named Elliot wandered into the shop. He wasn't from the village, his boots were muddy in the wrong places, and his scarf was tied by someone else's hands. He held something carefully in both hands. A tiny wooden bird, its beak chipped and wings askew. "It's from my grandfather," Elliot said. "It used to live in his cuckoo clock. He said it chirped once for every wish he made." Theo took the bird and studied it. The wood was dry and old, but not brittle. Inside, A tiny spring waited quietly, as though still listening. "What happened to the clock?" Theo asked. "It stopped," Elliot said, "after he got too tired to make wishes." Theo nodded, then looked toward the glowing clock above the workbench. "Would you like to see if we can help it remember how?" Elliot nodded. Theo set to work. As always, he moved slowly. He spoke not to Elliot, but to the bird. "What dreams did you carry?" He polished the beak, realigned the wings, and rewound the spring with a tool made from an old violin string. Above them, the glowing clock pulsed once warm, encouraging. Theo smiled. "It's ready." He cupped the bird in his hands, then whispered something too soft for Elliot to hear. When he opened his palms, the bird chirped once. Not loud, but clear, like a sigh made of song. Elliot's eyes widened. "Can I keep it?" "It was always yours," Theo said. "It just forgot for a while." Elliot tucked the bird into his coat pocket. "Will it chirp again?" "Whenever you need to remember something soft," Theo replied. That evening, Theo poured his tea and sat beside the fire. He opened his brown notebook and jotted a small line. "Fixed a bird who carried a wish. Heard a boy, remember." He looked up at the Dreamtime clock. It pulsed gently, then glowed a little brighter. Theo closed his eyes. This time, his dream came quickly. He stood in a room without walls, surrounded by clocks that didn't tick. Each one glowed a different color sapphire, rose gold, green like leaves after rain. They didn't tell time, they told stories. He approached the nearest one. It opened like a book. Inside, a boy stood by a window. The wind played with his hair. In his hands was a wooden bird, and it chirped once as a lantern floated past the glass. Theo woke slowly, wrapped in warmth and peace. The clock still pulsed, and the words he'd whispered into the bird's hollow body that afternoon came back to him. Let each tick carry a wish. Let each chirp be a breath of light. That week, Theo began carving more tiny birds, each one a little different. One with a crown of brass, one with wings curled like petals. He didn't know exactly why, but he trusted the rhythm of it. Villagers began stopping by, not for repairs, but to sit for a while, to listen, to let their own stories surface in the quiet ticking air. Theo welcomed them all. Not to buy, not to fix, but to remember. The clocks ticked softly, the new birds chirped now and then, and the Dreamtime clock pulsed like a lighthouse in a sky made of sleep. Some nights, Theo sat without tea, without pen, without even thought, just breath, and the clock kept wonder, and Theo, the quiet man with hands of cedar and time, listened to it all. The ticking, the remembering, the dream that had learned to speak. Chapter 4. A village full of sleepy clocks. As autumn deepened, the village grew sleepier in the gentlest of ways. The leaves turned copper and gold, drifting down like slow-falling thoughts. Children walked home from school with yawns hidden behind mittens, and chimneys sent up sleepy smoke that curled like lullabies through the air. And all around, the clocks began to change. Not suddenly, not with any announcement, just gradually. Mrs. Evelyn's grandfather clock, which had always ticked with sharp insistence, began to chime a little slower, its tone deep and soothing like a cello played at dusk. Mr. Penwick's wall, clock famous for its overly punctual hourly squano, gave a low coo instead, as if reminding rather than demanding. No one could say exactly when the shift began, but they all felt it. Time itself seemed to soften, and everyone agreed it began when Theo made that glowing clock. Though no one had seen it directly, rumors drifted through the cobbled streets like friendly ghosts. Children whispered about dreams that came true. Grown-ups noticed they were remembering things they'd forgotten: a lullaby from childhood, the smell of their mother's tea, the way rain sounded on the roof when they used to nap beneath it. And one by one, they began to ask Theo not for timepieces, but for something else. Do you still have one of those clocks that helps you sleep? Or, I don't want a clock that tells me when to wake up. I want one that remembers how to rest. Theo never promised anything. He simply listened. Then, when the moment felt right, he'd nod and begin working. He called them Dreamtime clocks, each one different. A small round one shaped like a moon, with a tick so soft it could only be heard by those already drifting. A square one that glowed gently in the dark, with hands that moved slower the more quietly you breathed. A tall, spindly one that played notes only in the key of sighs. Theo didn't advertise. He didn't label or price. He simply placed the clocks in the window, one by one, and waited. And the villagers came. They came in twos and threes, drawn not by need but by longing. Some bought clocks, others sat for tea. A few left in silence, their shoulders lighter. One child asked, "Why do your clocks sound like bedtime?" Theo smiled and said, "Because they remember how to hush." And that was the beginning of what became known as the sleepy clock season. The village began to slow not out of laziness, but out of peace. People walked instead of hurried. Lanterns were lit earlier, and the streets took on a golden glow as if the whole town was wrapped in a warm quilt. Theo kept crafting, the Dreamtime clock pulsing quietly above his bench. He never rushed. He let the rhythm of breath and memory guide him. One evening, as he was shaping a tiny bell meant for a child's nightstand clock, he felt something different. The Dreamtime clock above him pulsed brighter, then slower. He paused. Its glow warmed, almost like a smile. Theo set down his tools and placed his hand gently on the clock's side. It felt like a heart, a quiet one, and in that moment, he realized something. The clock had never been just a clock. It had become a keeper, not of time, but of stories, of dreams, of the in-between moments where the world was soft enough to let someone rest. He whispered a thank you, The clock pulsed once, and in the village below, a baby took their first deep sleep. A baker remembered his father's voice, and a teacher dreamed of flying over the meadows on wings made of wind and wonder. That night, the clocks all ticked together, not in unison, but in harmony. And time, instead of moving forward, seemed to cradle everyone gently in place. Chapter 5. Theo's Quiet Midnight. The night was clear, brushed with stars like scattered sugar. The wind was slow, barely enough to ruffle the ivy on the shop walls. Inside, the clocks ticked their lullabies, each a different rhythm, a different dream. Theo sat alone, though he didn't feel it. A mug of peppermint tea steamed beside him, forgotten in his hand. The fire had turned to glowing coals, humming softly in the hearth. And on the highest shelf, the Dreamtime clock pulsator, soft golden light that bathed the room in warmth no lantern could offer. Tonight, Theo didn't tinker or sketch. He listened, and what he heard was not sound, but stillness, a kind of hush that filled not just the room, but the space between his thoughts. He set down the tea and looked at the old brown notebook on his workbench. It had been filled over time with sketches and clock parts and passing memories, but now it opened to a fresh page, the spine easing as if it had been waiting. Theo picked up his pen. Sometimes, he wrote, clocks aren't meant to tell us when to go, but when to stay. He paused, listened again. The Dreamtime clock glowed softly, and in that moment, a memory stirred not of childhood or dream, but of something recent, something small. It was the way Lila's hands had cradled her father's watch. The way Elliot had smiled when his wooden bird chirped. The soft pause people made before stepping into his shop, as if entering sacred space. All of it. Pieces of quiet. He wrote again. The smallest moments are the ones the clock remembers. He looked at the Dreamtime clock. Is that what you are? He asked aloud. A keeper of small moments? The clock pulsed once. Theo smiled. The shop was wrapped in peace. Even the ticking had grown slower, softer as if the clocks themselves were dreaming. He stood and moved to the window. The village lay, silent. Golden windows flickered like stars. Far off, the owl's cry floated across the rooftops. Somewhere, a lullaby played on a music box no one remembered winding. Theo watched for a while, then turned back inside. He lit a small lantern and took the stairs to his room. The Dreamtime clock pulsed one last time before dimming to a soft ember glow. Upstairs, Theo tucked himself into bed. He let his hand rest on the edge of the quilt, the way his mother used to do when he was a boy, and he whispered, "Good night." Not to the clocks, not even to the room, but to the moment, to the hush, to the stillness between things. As he closed his eyes, the clocks below ticked on. Not loudly, not to wake, but to hold. Each tick a blanket, each talk a breath. And in the heart of the shop, the Dreamtime clock pulsed softly, carrying the old clockmaker gently into sleep, like a boat across starlit waters, like a story told only in dreams. Chapter 6: A Time for Wonder. Winter tiptoed into the village, not with fanfare, but with a hush. Snow fell in soft layers, coating rooftops and windowsills like powdered dreams. The streets were quieter now, boots crunched gently, and breath curled in the air like steam from Theo's teacup. The whole world seemed to move slower, as if the Dreamtime clock had gently pulled a blanket over the village. Inside Theo's shop, the warmth held steady. The clocks ticked low and sweet, some chiming now and then as if just to stretch. The Dreamtime clock had grown even gentler, its pulse almost invisible, yet its presence filled every corner. Visitors came less often now, but when they did, they lingered longer. They brought stories instead of repairs. They left not with purchases, but with lighter shoulders. Theo spent his days finishing a few clocks he had started in autumn. A silver and blue night clock for a woman who dreamed in paintings. A wooden travel watch for a boy who liked to imagine trains running on starlight. A grandfather clock that chimed only once a day at the moment someone needed it most. He worked quietly, with the ease of someone who had finally remembered the shape of peace. One morning, Tesseth Baker's daughter peeked into the shop, cheeks pink from the cold. "Mama says I sleep better now," she said, spinning slowly on her boot heels. "She says our clock hums like a lullaby." Theo nodded. "That means it's remembering something for you." Tessa smiled. "Do clocks have dreams too?" Theo thought about it. "I think they dream of the things we forget to say. The feelings we tuck into our pillows. The songs we hum without noticing." Tessa blinked. "That sounds like a nice dream." She left a small paper star on the counter before running off into the snow. Theo held it gently. A folded wish. A moment wrapped in paper. That night, he placed it beside the Dreamtime clock. The clock pulsed once. In his sleep, Theo found himself on a hill under a velvet sky. Lanterns floated around him, drifting like fireflies that had forgotten how to land. Each one carried a memory. A whispered bedtime story, the comfort of a friend's hand, the hush after laughter. And high above them all, the Dreamtime clock floated, ticking not toward anything, but with everything. It turned slowly in the air, glowing like the moon, ticking like a heartbeat. And Theo, sitting cross-legged in the grass, felt every tick gently wash over him like waves. When he woke, it was morning. Snow dusted the shop windows. The fire had gone out, but the warmth remained. Theo stretched, then made tea. He opened the front door and let in the crisp air. The chimes above the door rang softly, as if they too were yawning. He turned to the Dreamtime clock. It was still pulsing, still glowing, still keeping something sacred. Not time, but tenderness. And Theo, with hands a little slower and a heart full of hush, returned to his work. Outside, the village breathed. Children dreamed. Clocks whispered, and the Dreamtime clock, high on its shelf, ticked on gently forever, and always a quiet keeper of wonder.